Hello everyone, I'm Dante and welcome back to another This Week in Anthem, featuring another large patch with over 300 fixes and an all-new loot controversy. So let's jump into another mixed week for Anthem. Yet again, we've got another lengthy set of patch notes, with over 300 fixes, quality of life changes, and a few other adjustments. I don't see much point in just reading this all off, so instead, I'm going to pull out the highlights that are going to have the most impact on your experience, though I will follow the same structure their blog uses, to keep things as simple and easy to follow as I can. The patch notes start off with what BioWare consider the most notable or impactful changes: respawn restriction changes, loot changes, stability, and audio fixes. Respawn changes just mean the respawn restriction zones have almost entirely been removed where possible, and now in all instances offer a way out of the down state. 10 seconds for the crit path, agent missions and other pre-endgame activities. All endgame activities will have a 30-second timer, and free play remains open as is. This is a quality of life improvement, but doesn't address all its issues, and introduces a new one. If you get downed in a boss fight, particularly at the endgame, and use this feature, the checkpoint will be outside the combat arena. The game will then teleport you into the encounter, and for some, you will immediately be downed upon re-entering, because you become targeted before you gain control of your character. A niche issue for sure, but I've seen instances of this happening popping up on Reddit already. The loot changes I'll get to later, as that's a whole grand issue, and the other two changes are pretty self-explanatory. But I have to say, the game does feel smoother now, just a shame it didn't launch without these issues to begin with. When it comes to general fixes and improvements, this is where you'll find the largest set of changes, mostly covering quality of life, bug fixes, performance improvements, and generally being more transparent with how the game communicates information. For me, the most notable change are all pretty minor in this section, such as the inbox now actually working on PC, which is not noticeable when you're already in the endgame, but when content drops, I'm sure we'll find a use. If you're not sure what this means, well, when you log into the game you get a news page, the top of which is supposed to be a character mailbox, where you see notes from characters you interact with. On console this worked just as intended, but on PC, you might have never seen a single one of these as the game didn't tell you they existed. But in your journal tab, there is a mailbox that stores all these character insights. The biggest change I see here is linked to quick play, which has been in a frankly awful state since we've had access to the game, throwing you into random parts of the story, ahead of where you could be in the critical path, spoilering future plot points. But the most egregious of its issues are that most of the time it doesn't even work. You'll load into bugged missions where the objective hasn't spawned, or infinite enemies are spawning over and over. Many random issues for what should be a core feature. Hopefully now they're all fixed. Now if we could just choose what missions we got to play, so there was more opportunities to backfill through the quick play system. But one step at a time, we're getting there. The other issue I'm really pleased to see is related to staggering, the bane of all Colossus mains, who have an annoyingly long recovery time. BioWare have reduced the amount of impact force enemies' attacks have, especially on GM1 and lower. This should prevent stun locking when being attacked by larger enemies such as Dominion Brutes and Ursics. This will also apply to all other javelins of course. I just find it most frustrating while playing Colossus, as the shield break stagger can be chained into an unavoidable stun lock, even if rare. With the new recovery times and the change in force, this should be a thing of the past. When it comes to stronghold updates, this is partially a repeat of the loot corrections and just a bug fix, so nothing really to talk about here. For creature updates, we mostly have changes to force, which I just mentioned, some minor fixes, and a partial overhaul of the Ash Titans. I've always considered them the worst enemy in Anthem, as they break the fundamentals of the game, have a really short weak spot animations, which coincide with attacks that can hit far outside of your actual hitbox. BioWare have taken on this feedback it seems, and are attempting to correct all these points. Their attacks should now coincide with actual hitboxes. Lesser Titans will have weak spots all the time, all types have their resistance reduced by 25% for fire and 30% for other primers, making combos an actual consideration, and again for us Colossus players means we can do more than just shoot, as most our abilities tend to lean into fire. On top of all these changes, we have improvements to weak points and the actual way you fight them, so you have more time to deal damage while they charge attacks, Previously, on high levels, you essentially had a couple of seconds of damage, then just hit and dodged attacks. Damage is now amplified by an increased amount for hitting these weak points, overall lowering their difficulty by making the mechanics more engaging. Though they will still be tough in Grandmaster difficulties and any time you have to fight 3 at once. Unless of course you're a Storm, and the Titan essentially has no way of touching you. I still think we could do with seeing variants of the Titans for each element, perhaps with some alterations to the abilities to be more thematic for each, such as an acid spray attack instead of rings to dodge, something along those lines. All of the following changes are essentially balance changes, some fixing bugs on abilities such as attacks not passing through wind wall, inscription bugs as some still weren't applying bonuses correctly, making them useless. Then the main block of changes are weapon rebalancing, with the core damage being bumped across the board. Now onto the main controversy of the week, with loot changes for Anthem. The main idea with the recent round of updates was to make Anthem's endgame actually feel rewarding, as frankly not much loot drops, and even less of it is useful. And many members of the community have gone well out of their way to prove it, all because the most recent patch may have removed the 2 lowest tiers of loot, but accidentally increased the drop rate substantially. Loot was raining from everything, making all content suddenly rewarding. For a few hours until this bug was removed and something became starkly apparent. Loot in Anthem is boring, or at least its drop rate is. If you dare take a look at Reddit right now, all you'll see are pages of posts asking for this bug to be put back in, which isn't surprising. This is the exact same method all of the best loot games use. Getting loot is rewarding, and if you're playing a loot game, it's what you want to see. That's why when you kill any boss in Diablo 3, loot a resplendent chest, or just complete a greater rift, loot literally rains from the sky. Is all of this loot useful? No, of course not, but that's not the point. The sheer quantity of it means that some of it might be, and as you go higher and higher in difficulties, both the quantity that drops and the rate of the top end loot increases drastically. Something we do not see in Anthem. Regardless of the difficulty, the same amount of loot roughly drops, but a slightly higher chance of Masterworks drops in the top difficulties. Luckily, some people have started documenting these drops and reporting their results over the weekend, such as Kickass Inc., who did a comparison in loot quality in Strongholds. You'll notice that a pre-current patch loot drops give roughly a 10% chance of Masterworks and a 1% of Legendary, across 200 drops and taking literally hours. When you average that per hour, it's really not much at all. And what's worse, not only did this percent of Masterworks drop to a third of the starting number, but the total loot drop rate has gone down by around 25%. It's also starting to be rumoured that all of the endgame content is somehow the worst way to farm gear, as Moosey999 showed with their posts. They've played for 50 hours and had 44 legendaries in that time, by ignoring all the endgame and world quests and just killing random yellows in freeplay. To give this some context, I've done almost exclusively legendary contracts, strongholds, and have recently started doing more world quests in freeplay. And I've had only 5 legendaries drop over 70 hours. So either this person is an outstanding outlier, or BioWare have completely broken how the loot tables work on enemies. Which raises an important point that we need to discuss. How much loot should drop, and what percentage of that loot should be masterwork or above. Of course, this will come down to personal preference, but the community as a whole seems to agree that what we have now isn't enough, and the balance of drops from the content is completely wrong. In its current state, loot drops for Anthem are not rewarding, and even if you want to give BioWare the benefit of the doubt, it's hard to argue against that statement. I'm starting to become quite aware that I'm bordering on the rambling stage at this point, so I want to give my opinions in as clear a way as I can. Eventually, I do see this problem being fixed, but to get to that point, the loot in Anthem needs to practically rain. To do this, I would double all current loot drops from endgame activities, especially those from strongholds. Secondly, the chances for item need to be readjusted, and to scale with difficulty. Grandmaster 1, for example, should have a minimum 10% masterwork drop rate and a 1% legendary rate, which we currently have. For each Grandmaster level up, drastic changes should happen to make them worth doing for the health pool changes. Grandmaster 2 should have a 15% Masterwork drop rate and a 2% legendary change, with Grandmaster 3 going far further by eliminating all below epic items, having a 20 to 30% Masterwork rate and a 5% legendary rate, as this is the true endgame. It's actually difficult and the rewards should match that difficulty. As far as I can tell, I'm not alone in these thoughts. Many from the Reddit community are now considering to do a blackout in protest of the loot in Anthem, which seems like an overreaction, but I can't honestly say it's a terrible idea. Their goals are pretty similar to my ideas above, in that they want time invested into Anthem to be more rewarding. I have no idea if this will have an effect on the changes we see in loot, as BioWare are working on changes already, just not at the speed that we would like. But when it comes to acting on the changes you want to see, I hope it works. As in the short term, there are reasonably quick fixes BioWare can put in place, such as statistically increasing loot quantity or drop rates of endgame activities. Honestly, the easiest fix for now would just be to increase the number of drops overall with the same chance. Would only be a temporary solution, but far better than what we have so far. I'll link the information to this below if you want to get involved yourself. These are just my opinions though, but how do you think loot should scale? How much should drop, and how should difficulty affect the rates? Let me know in the comment section below. Thanks for watching this week in Anthem. As always, you can find links to everything I referenced below. If you found this useful, be sure to leave a like or a dislike if you prefer. You can support the channel by subscribing and using the bell to be notified of future content as it goes live. Until next time, I've been Dante, thanks for watching.